right, welcome everyone to the March Boise ITSM meeting for 2022. Let me go ahead and share my slide deck and we'll go ahead and walk through our introduction. Okay, can everyone see my slides? Those coming through?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, so as always, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to attend our March virtual meeting. Very special thank you for having our special guest speaker, David Cannon here. Thanks, David, for being our presenter today. And I know that we were expecting to see some first timers here today based on the RSVPs, and hopefully they're just running a couple minutes late and will be here. So we wanted to have everyone take a few minutes to introduce themselves as part of the meeting today. I always talk about our why for starting this group and why we have the Boise ITSM Talks meetings. Our goal in these presentations is to have speakers come in and really be able to deliver some actionable information. We've had very good success in all of the presentations we've had, especially since we went virtual, with being able to accomplish that. And I know David will have some good takeaways for us today. And encouraging attendee participation. One of the things that we like to do, and I want to get back to doing with this group, is to do some report outs as people are learning from the meetings. What did you get out of the meeting that you attended the last month? And is there anything that you were able to try out in your organization or potentially learn from as a part of being a part of learning from the meetings and from our speakers? We also want to encourage everyone to become better IT leaders and to continue to fill the ITSM voids in our communities. I'll go ahead and have some real quick group introductions. And I know a lot of the folks that are here certainly know each other for the most part. See, Brian made it on. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
Welcome to the group.
Thank you.
All right, we're just getting started and wanted to do some quick group introductions. So I'll have everyone just very quickly introduce themselves, some guidance here, and in particular, looking for what's your experience or visibility with working in the cloud, and that'll provide some good starting point for David as far as being able to talk through some of the material that he has today to know a little bit more about the audience. So I'll have Michael, would you like to go first for us, please, today as far as introductions?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So my name is Michael Case. I'm a manager at Blue Cross of Idaho. And I don't know where I was going with that, but at Blue Cross of Idaho. So that's, I guess, all the relevant stuff for me. The cloud stuff, we have multiple SaaS applications. We use Workday and ServiceNow and Salesforce and some other products like that. And then we do use Amazon for some web infrastructure. I personally don't have any hands-on experience using that stuff. I did play with a database in Youre once for like a practical, like an interview technical exam thing, but that's about it. So really lots of experience in the SaaS realm, just as an end user using it and stuff like that. And so I guess that's about it for me. I'm familiar with the concepts of cloud and things like that, but no practical experience. So I'm in management, so I don't have to. Other smarter people can deal with it.
Well, I'm not sure I completely agree with that. I think it's good to have that experience regardless, Michael, but I get what you're saying. So thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Gretchen, I'll have you go next, please.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Gretchen Klein. I am a customer success manager at HP. And my experience visibility with working in the cloud is also limited. However, HP is working on implementing systems that will utilize the cloud, which will be more beneficial to our customers. So we are in the process of doing that at the moment.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Gretchen. Judy, I have you next on my screen. Go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Judy Sanker, and I'm a trainer consultant in much of this space and have been for about 10 years. And prior to that, I spent about 28 years at Procter & Gamble, running global services and ensuring that we had operational excellence across all of those services. So here, your question about the cloud. Yes, I've used the cloud and I have managed, I believe, 2 transitions to the cloud. One was Azure and one was with AWS. So a little bit of experience on both sides.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Judy. Donna, have you next. Go ahead, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Donna Knapp. I am the Curriculum Development Manager for ITSM Academy. We provide ITIL and Agile and DevOps related training. So that's my background, is as an educator on these topics. I don't have hands-on experience with the cloud, but when I really understood the capabilities that cloud provides an organization, it shifted a whole bunch of brain cells for me in terms of how we look at things like ITIL, right? And the need to adapt our IT service management practices and how it is, in fact, an enabler for things like DevOps. So for me, it very much, again, shifted how I view the world of IT. So that's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Donna. Brian, go ahead, please, and introduce yourself to the group. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian. I am a data science analyst at Dell Technologies. And so I've mostly been a consumer of the cloud. Dell does have a lot of cloud capabilities already, and they have, in the group that I was in, I've used a lot of Azure for data science, so data storage on the cloud, and then also big data, decentralized calculations and that sort of thing. But I haven't been a decision maker or someone who's been having to get into the nitty gritty about how the cloud works before. So but that might be changing soon. So I'm trying to expand my horizons.
All right, awesome. Glad you could make it today, and welcome. Real quick, I'll just describe my experience working the cloud. I'll introduce myself real quick. I'm Jeff Jensen, founder of iTrain IT Leaders. I do consulting and training in all of the related complementary frameworks around ITIL, Agile, DevOps, Lean, and Value Stream Mapping. I was involved early on in one of the first client migrations at the managed services company that I worked for 6-7 years ago, did into taking one of their clients from being on-prem into the cloud with all of their software and systems. And the architecture around that and the steps that went into going through that ended up being very educational for me, just from the standpoint of, one, the level of planning and rigor that went around making decisions on what should go first and in what order and who should have access to it and the ownership pieces of that. So it ended up being a lot longer project than what we had originally scoped and planned for. And there were some good key learnings that I know that organization was able to apply to future state with other migrations. And now pretty much everything that they do for their clients, they do migrations as one of their services, but also just the work that they do for the most part is 100% virtual anyway. So it was interesting to go through that. And more recently, I was involved in consulting with a client that was involved in really trying to get their arms around their cloud spend and having out of control costs, having lack of governance around what should be in the cloud and how long it should be there and who should own, making sure that's being managed. So David, I'll be interested. I suspect some of those issues are going to be front and center for what you've seen as well. And it'll be fun to have you talk about some of those pieces too. So that's a little bit about my experience there. Want to introduce David Cannon, and I'm sure he'll give you a little bit of background on himself as well, but David is absolutely a phenomenal presenter and speaker and author. He's of course been involved in ITIL for a very long time, since the beginnings pretty much, author of ITIL V3 Service Strategy, co-lead editor for the Digital and IT Strategy in ITIL 4, and really someone that, as I've gotten to know over the last few years, got a chance to meet him finally in person at the Service Management World Conference back in, I think 2019 was the last time we were able to be in person. And I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to go again in 2022 and hopefully see him there, and just have really enjoyed the opportunities I've had to collaborate with David. So David's been a presenter at this meeting before, and I'm very proud and happy to welcome him back again for his presentation on why the cloud works for some, but not for others. David, I'll stop my share and hand things over to you. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And thank you for inviting me back. I am going to attempt to share my screen. There you go. You should be able to see my presentation. I'm in a shared workspace, so I'm, those are not halos, they're lights, I guess. Although that looks pretty good, doesn't it? I'm going to be talking about the cloud, and it's based on the research that we did while working on the latest cloud book in ITIL. It's the first one. And it's a book about how to acquire and manage cloud services. It does not cover things like technical architecture. It doesn't look at how you structure your services within the cloud. It doesn't look at how you configure the cloud. It really looks at how you manage cloud as either a part of your operation or as a business opportunity. And so in that context, we have to ask the question as to why cloud works for some and not others. And of course, the first, I have to back that up. If I say it doesn't work for some, what do I mean? How big is that issue? And there it is. This was research we got from multiple sources. And by the way, the two company names you see at the top there, Synexios is our UK-based organization. Infinity 3 is US-based. So I represent both, depending on where I'm speaking. So today it's Infinity 3. But the research that we did, and this comes from multiple different sources, indicated that success in the cloud was very measured. In fact, 2/3 of organizations using cloud services do not achieve the objectives they set out to. That doesn't mean they didn't get benefit from it. It just means they didn't get as much of a benefit as they were intending to. So most organizations found that it was more expensive than they thought. And we'll go into some reasons as to why that is. A lot were told that it would increase their speed to market. And in fact, in a number of organizations, it did no such thing. And again, I'll look at some reasons for that as well. Service levels, no significant increase for a number of organizations, and no achievement of business results, so such as increased revenue, success in new markets, etc. For 2/3 of companies. That is a pretty high rate of disappointment, if you like. Wouldn't necessarily call it failure. I would just say that there were expectations that the cloud would do more, and it did not deliver up to those expectations. Now, the first thing I've heard people do as well say, well, then you shouldn't move to cloud. That's the wrong thing to do. If cloud is so bad, you shouldn't be using cloud services. First of all, that's not feasible. The only reason we're having this call right now is because there is such a thing as the cloud. The only reason why you're able to do a number of things in modern life is because the cloud exists. Ordering things, doing business, simply going out to eat in a restaurant is because people are using automated supply chains, sourcing through the cloud, through cloud-based services and so on. So, we're not saying here, I'm certainly not saying that the cloud is a bad thing. And if you were to look at the results of the reasons why organizations were not achieving what they intended to, what you'll find is that in most of those cases, the reasons were about not being adequately prepared or geared for using cloud services. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that in a moment. Of course, there are some obstacles which people have had to face, things that they didn't necessarily account for when they were preparing for cloud, things like how does security work? Things like, IT has always been a centralized budget, and now suddenly people are paying directly for the cloud services that they use. And that's a huge shift in the perception of what things cost and how we should be using them. There's certainly a lack of expertise. And I know we tend to think that the cloud has been around forever because it feels that way. But realistically, mainstream cloud solutions have really only been around for the last 10 or so years. I know we can look at instances going back into the 80s and even 70s, which were kind of cloud-like services. But mainstream cloud is really a very new technology. And it's going to take a while, I think, for people to become certified and train up in that. And especially now, if you combine security and cloud expertise, with those two together, there is a huge scarcity of resources. I'm not going to cover each of these in detail, but just to point out that one of the reasons why people were unable to achieve the levels of success they hoped for was because they were unable to overcome some of these barriers. I will cover just the first one, security, a little bit. And one of the most frequent issues with security is that there is an assumption by many consumers of cloud that the cloud is automatically secured. It is not. In fact, the cloud itself is quite secure. And AWS and Azure and Google and others will tell you exactly how they've secured their cloud environment. However, they cannot take responsibility for how you use those services, whether you've configured them securely, whether you're making them available to the right people, whether people have access to data that they shouldn't have access to. The cloud service provider is not responsible for that. And there's this disconnect very often between the consumer and the cloud service provider about, what actually are you responsible for and what actually are we responsible for? Interesting that both Azure and AWS were involved in helping to architect and write this book. And both of them had very similar experiences. And of course, many consumers who participated in the book had very similar experiences, this disconnect of understanding who's responsible for what. So that was, I can say right at the outset, is probably one of the biggest causes of people failing to meet, or organizations failing to meet their expectations in the cloud. It's this disconnect of expectation, or disconnect of who's responsible for doing what. And we'll cover that in more detail as we go along. By the way, if anyone would like to pause and ask a question, please do. And if you're struggling to hear me, also again, please just let me know. Understand there's background noise from time to time.
Yeah. Hey, David, I actually did have a quick question. I was going to wait till the end, but
Yeah.
if you don't mind me asking, if you don't mind going back a
Sure.
slide, when you look at the compliance line on here,
Oh, yeah.
does that have to do with the ability to show evidence or from an audit trail perspective around regulatory and compliance things? I was just curious to dig into what that is from a scope standpoint.
The most common ones of those are, for example, for what is it called now? The European governance and risk standards is, where is your data located? In which country? Well, if it's in the cloud, it could be in a number of places, and in fact could be in several places at the same time. So your ability to track where that data is one thing. And the ability to get assurances from the service provider as to exactly where that data is very important in that case. That was a very early issue and one that's been addressed to a large degree by the major service providers. But then there are issues that are more local. For example, HIPAA. So if I'm in a healthcare organization, I don't only have to ensure that my data is secure, I have to be able to show back-to-back agreements which ensure that those contracts are compliant with the HIPAA regulation. So, compliance goes down from sort of high-level legislation about where data is kept, all the way down to what are the regulations that apply to my industry or my type of organization in terms of where I store data, who I make it available to, how I secure that environment. And the issue becomes if the cloud environment is less secure than the regulations require from me, there is nothing I can do to make it more secure. I'm dependent on that baseline. Now, good news is that most cloud service providers, certainly the hyperscale, which is the large cloud service providers, are very aware of these regulations, and their undertaking is to secure to the highest level of requirement. And so anybody that's beneath that benefits from that, of course. You know, anybody with a lower level of requirements will benefit from the higher requirements in many cases. But yes, it's again, the assumption is that, well, AWS or Azure or Google or IBM Cloud or wherever it is aware of those regulations and it automatically applies to my organization. Well, there is nothing automatic about compliance or security. It is something that has to be validated and checked. And, you know, to be honest, I think a lot of this challenge in compliance management is just people being uncertain of how to do that. It's not that it's impossible to do, it's just, well, we can certify data on our own servers in our own data center. We can show all kinds of levels of security, but how do we do that in the cloud? How do we demonstrate levels of security in the cloud? It's very difficult to do because we don't own those devices. So it can be very challenging. Did that answer the question?
It did, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so how do we get the cloud to work for you? And this is the bulk of the presentation. And I've got 8 keys. There are 8 things. There's probably a lot more than 8 things, but I really selected 8 key things that we found as we were researching this book that really set apart those organizations that were forging ahead with the use of cloud and those that were really struggling with the use of the cloud. And the very first one is not actually related to the cloud at all. It's related to the way in which the organization deals with change. So this comes out of the Digital and IT Strategy book, the DITS book in ITIL. It is, I don't even think it's in the cloud book. I think it might be. But the purpose of this diagram is very simply to say, when you are in a very stable environment, your strategy will tend to be reviewed on longer cycles. So if you look at that very first one, if you can see my arrow, that purple arrow, that purple cycle there, it's an annual cycle. And an annual cycle is great when your business doesn't change very much. But as things become more disruptive in your industry, and especially in the case of DITS, we're talking about digital technology innovation. As new types of technology come along, the cycles speed up. And the reason for that is because that innovation is speeding up. So new features, new functionality, disruptive technology gets introduced a lot quicker and a lot more frequently. So your review cycle of your strategy has to be a lot quicker because you're constantly being disrupted. When you are in a severe state of disruption, your strategy cycle shrinks to a very short time. What you see in the middle here is a pandemic planning cycle. We wrote this book right in the middle of the pandemic. And what we noticed was in the pandemic, your strategies were being reviewed every 2 to 4 weeks. And I'm not talking about just, well, let's just tweak the way we do things. No, organizations had to reinvent the way they did things, had to change their entire business model. And literally it would be 2 weeks. Did that work? No, it didn't. Okay, well, let's try something different, right? So you have this hugely tumultuous review cycle on your strategy. Now, thankfully, we're moving past that and we're becoming a little bit more stable again. But a couple of things happen when you go into these highly volatile and uncertain kinds of environments. One is your strategy cycle shrinks. But the other thing that happens is you notice how you have only 2 major initiatives during this very stable environment over here. Notice what happens to the number and duration of the initiatives in the middle. You get a lot more and they're a lot shorter. Now, when you move to the cloud, And this is what people don't tell you about moving to the cloud. When you move to the cloud, you cannot avoid it. You are going to move. If you're in a stable environment, you are suddenly going to find yourself in an environment which is more volatile and less predictable. So a lot of people will tell you, no, don't worry, all you're going to do is you're going to do exactly the same things you're doing today. You're just going to do it in the cloud. Absolute. That is not true. When you move to the cloud, everything changes. Behavior changes. The way you request service changes. The way you manage those service changes. The availability of alternative services becomes a lot more visible to the users of those services. So behavior will change very quickly. Within 1 year, the way in which your organization works and the speed with which it works will change. The challenge has been for many organizations is that some parts of the organization do not adapt as quickly as others. And this is where the speed to market piece gets delayed in many cases, because the group that introduced the specific cloud service has a vision for increasing their speed to market for a product or for a new market or whatever the case may be. But all of a sudden, they're all on board and they have this great product group that's forging ahead. But the rest of the organization who's sitting in the back office, financial support, supply chain, or whoever they are, is just struggling to keep up with the speed. So it's not that cloud wasn't fast enough. It's that the organization could not adapt itself to the speed at which this innovation, this new way of doing things was changing. And yes, Donna, you're right. That is exactly why DevOps is failing in some orgs. And I would say it's not DevOps' fault. A lot of people say, you see, you shouldn't be using DevOps. You should be going back to ITIL. No, absolute nonsense. This has nothing to do with it's the fact that you have the way in which DevOps has been implemented. You have some teams forging ahead and other teams being stuck in the past. And so if you're going to do DevOps just as you would use any other framework, you need to make sure that the entire organization is adapting to the speed at which the organization is doing business. So that's the first key. And the second key is related to this. And Donna, thank you for raising DevOps. Prepare for new ways of working. It's not just the speed that changes, but you're gonna prepare for new ways of working. And this comes out of the DITS book too, by the way. It doesn't come from the DITS book. I created this diagram way back when I worked for HP in the early 2000s. And what we noticed at that time was that the way in which applications and services were being built and delivered was changing. Again, if you're in a very stable environment, you have a very stable plan, build, run cycle. Depending on the organization, for example, if you work for a health insurance company, you would find that cycle took exactly 1 year. And it was timed to be launched just before the election period, the open enrollment period. And it worked really well because that is the speed at which the business moved. That is the speed at which innovation happened. You could quite easily accommodate innovation as it happened. However, what we've seen happening is that innovation has become a lot more frequent. Now, what's really interesting about innovation is that two things happen. One is it speeds up the organization. And so the more you innovate, the quicker you have to get to market, because it's about competition. It's about being ahead of your competitors. It's about keeping your customers really happy, delighted. But at the same time, the more you fuel innovation, you're fueling what's happening at the bottom of this cycle. So here's how it works. So you innovate something. It's great. Everybody loves it. It doesn't work very well because it's innovative. But over time, and when I say over time, I mean within 2 to 8 weeks, you figure out what the problems are with that innovation, what the flaws are, you fix them, and you teach your customers and users how to manage that more effectively, how to use it more effectively, how to operate it more effectively. Suddenly, what was a competitive advantage now becomes understood and manageable by a greater number of people. The more people that operate it means the more people that have the capability to operate it, and the more people that have the capability the more people start selling that service. Eventually, what happens is that becomes a commodity. And commodities are the first things that you want to outsource. A couple of examples, one in the hardware environment, one in the software environment. In the hardware environment, you can look at the growth of servers. And back in the 80s, 90s, the kind of server you had, in other words, whether it was made by HP, Sun, Compaq, or Digital, or IBM, whichever of those. Type of server you had was extremely important because you could run certain types of application on certain types of operating system, which would only run on that type of architecture. And if you bought the wrong kind of hardware for the wrong kind of software, it didn't work very well. It was a huge issue. To overcome that, over time, servers became more and more standardized. They became so standard, we started having server farms. And in those server farms were multiple manufactured devices. To the state when we said, well, if we have all these different kind of devices and they're all using the same operating system and they're all performing in a similar way, why don't we just go for the cheapest? Which is what we did. And even beyond that, why don't we just create virtual machines and put them in the cloud? We don't even have to worry about the hardware. And so what's happened is something that was highly innovative, something that was a huge competitive differentiator, now becomes very commoditized. What do you do when you have something that is so commoditized that anybody can do it? You give it to the person that can do it the cheapest and still guarantee your service levels. That's where sourcing happens. And that person today just happens to be the cloud. Okay, very important to note that, and I'll come back to this point in a moment, what we source to the cloud, 99.9% of what we source to the cloud is commoditized resources. They are not highly specialized capabilities. We do not source highly specialized capabilities from the cloud in 99.9% of the time. What we do source from the cloud are highly commoditized components. That was the hardware one. I said I had a software one as well. ERP systems or ERM systems. Again, back in the 90s and 2000s, enterprise resource management was to be able to get and manage an enterprise resource management system meant that you could have a competitive advantage in your supply chain. It meant if you could automate that in-house, you could compete against somebody way more effectively who did not have that level of automation. Today, what we have now, I just passed the billboard on the way into the office here, was one of the cloud service provider, and the billboard simply said, sorry, SAP. That was it. Because everything that a small company needs to do, they don't need SAP for things to go on the cloud, and they can get it. The most commoditized components of this ERP are available online. Of course, the downside is they're commoditized. You can't do a lot of customization. You cannot make it a bespoke or tailored system. You can configure it by all means, but the minute you start getting into customization and so on, you lose the impact of having that commoditized component. So we see how this cycle works in a number of the kind of services that we have always managed in the past. Now, it doesn't end there. When you have this commoditization cycle, this innovation / commoditization cycle happening, it changes the way your organization works. And it looks like something like this. Welcome back, DevOps. There you go, Donna, your comment again. You have something that approaches more of a DevOps-like approach. You have an integrated build run cycle. And of course, depending on what flavor you use, you can have a lean flavored one, you can have a total quality management flavored one, you can, whatever cycle is, you may want to replace some of those words, learn and measure and whatever. It doesn't really matter. The most important thing is you have a tightly integrated build run cycle. And that tightly integrated build run cycle is supported by the commoditized components, which may be in the basement somewhere. More likely they're in the cloud. And it supports a very thin and agile planning cycle. So instead of having that high-level hierarchical strategy that was done once a year, you now have strategy happening all the time. Planning, replanning, reviewing, figuring out whether things worked. If not, going back, and adjusting. So this is a very different way of working than we grew up with. When I say we grew up, I'm talking about the old people like myself, right? People entering the workforce today, this is the operating model. They understand and know this is how they work. The problem is that you have this disconnect between people who are using the old way, because that's kind of where they came from, and people who are using these new methods of working, which come about because we're hooked into this innovation and commoditization cycle. So very important, if you're going to be using the cloud, be prepared to enter this new way of working, because the cloud does not work very well when you're in that kind of waterfall mode. It works really well where you're in this highly agile. If you want to call it DevOps, if you want to call it agile, whatever label you want to put on that. But this new method of working. Just a closer look at that cycle, and I want to point out this is really important. What is missing very often from these cycles is this top cycle here, this arrow from learn into plan and from plan back into build. We're still struggling with linking our strategy to our build run cycle in organizations. And that is something we're going to have to get better at. And what that means is, in organizations, as you move to the cloud, you need tighter linkage between the board, the executives, the business unit leaders, the product owners, the technologists, and your external suppliers, your cloud service provider. Those need to be far more tightly linked than they were before. And one of the reasons they need to be tightly linked is not so they can be more controlling and more hierarchical, but in fact so they can become more flat, so that the authority to make decisions and execute those decisions can be distributed, can be delegated. So this is the way in which organizations are working, and that they're going to work more and more that way. The quicker the whole organization understands this and moves across into this way, the better it's going to be. And again, this is one of the reasons why many organizations do not achieve the results that they expect from cloud, is because they're not able to make this transition. They're stuck in an old way of doing things. Third key, plan at the correct level. And this is just so important. Again, in the early days of cloud, I still hear this term a lot. The term cloud first was mentioned as a strategy. What is your cloud strategy? Cloud first. Doesn't matter what you do it in the cloud. Okay. It's not a good way of doing things, right? Because not everything is in the cloud. It's a great design principle, by the way. The cloud first. You know, when you design a new thing, start with the cloud. Think about how you're going to do it in the cloud first. If it works, great, move ahead. If it doesn't work, maybe we don't want to do it in the cloud, right? So it's a great design principle, not a great strategy. In fact, we ended up with a number of things in the cloud that should never have been there. For example, things that require unique expertise that only your organization has, things that are the source of your competitive advantage. Those kind of things very often don't belong in the cloud. Sometimes they do, but very often they should not be in the cloud. So you've got to be very careful. Your starting point should always be your business strategy. Business strategy is based increasingly on a digital strategy. The digital strategy and IT strategy are merging. By IT strategy, we mean those kind of back office components, mainly infrastructure and applications. By digital strategy, we mean those kind of, that includes those, but it's what makes it available in the hands of the consumer, and what automates, you know, many kinds of activities that are not necessarily based on information technology, but is based on, you know, industrial controls, et cetera, et cetera. But the important thing is your cloud strategy comes out of those three strategies: your business strategy, your digital strategy, and IT strategy. Now, increasingly, as organizations become more based on digital technology, that digital strategy will grow and IT strategy will be subsumed into it, and the business strategy will become more and more digitalized. Some people have asked, by the way, this is a little bit of an irrelevant discussion to this conversation, but nonetheless, it's interesting. Some people have said, well, in an entirely digital business, the digital strategy and the business strategy is the same thing. In theory, that's true. But in theory, or in practice, we still do not eat digital food, live in digital houses, and drive digital cars. Okay, and so there is always this physical layer, there's always this physical connection that we've got to provide for. Yes, digital technology is a way to tie it together, is a way to make it work better, is a way to communicate it better. But no business will ever be entirely 100% digital. And so you're always going to have this interplay between different types of strategy. Now, the important outcome of this is that when you think about a cloud strategy, it is not a strategy, it is in fact a tactic. That may be strategic to the person leading the cloud initiative, but to everybody else in the organization, for example, the CEO, the CIO, maybe not the CIO, but the CMO and the board of directors, it's just a tactic. These are operational decisions that, yeah, great. You go ahead and do that. I don't want to know how, I don't want to know what, I just want to make sure it was cheaper and faster. Okay, we have I'm struggling with my error. There we go. Yes, absolutely, Judy. We use physical products. As someone who comes out of the P&G world would absolutely know, you're nowhere without those products. Right? You cannot sell digital shampoo and soap and dog food and so on and so forth. It's just not possible. You can do it in a digital way. Absolutely. You can make it easier, faster, and better. You can improve quality, but ultimately there is that physical layer that always has to be taken into account. I'll take it one step further. I have a definition that I use of an organization. My definition of an organization is it's a group of people who does stuff for other people. And I love that. It's my own definition. You're welcome to use it if you think it's worthwhile, but I love it because it always puts the technology into perspective. I remember having this discussion in HP once. Somebody said to me, wouldn't it be great if everything was a service and then we could eliminate the human factor from it? I'm like, well, who would benefit? It's got to be a human involved somewhere. Somebody's got to receive the benefit of that, and somebody's got to think about how to provide that benefit. It's not automatic. So anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But the point is that the cloud and what we do with it and how we use it and how we manage it is always subservient to the strategy of our organization and the mission of people doing stuff for other people. I will get to that chat. Yes, exactly, Jeff. Great ITIL 4 plug there. That ignores the idea of value co-creation, where everybody who's involved in the value stream benefits from being involved, no matter whether you're a supplier, a consumer, or somewhere in between. And by the way, we're always both suppliers and consumers and someone in between, no matter what we're doing. We're somewhere in the chain, right? Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. Let's talk about key number 4. Key number 4 is base the way you use the cloud on your operating model. Again, in the research, we showed a number of people talking about this concept called the cloud operating model. When we asked them what they meant, nobody could really give us a definitive answer. Vaguely what it meant is the way we manage the cloud, the way the cloud works in our organization. Well, how does the cloud work in your organization? Well, we use it for storage and, okay, hold on. Your business people who are doing stuff for other people organize themselves in a certain way. You have very specific assets that you need to use, the capabilities that you need to use so that you can do those things for those other people. Okay, today they're being done in-house. When you move them to the cloud, what's the map? What's different? How does your operating model in your business now work differently because one of the components has been moved into the cloud? That's what we mean by cloud operating model. It means your business operating model as it has been automated or enabled by cloud services. And one of the most frequent mistakes that is made is that organizations go into the cloud without checking the current use of that capability or resource in the existing operating model. And so when suddenly the operating model goes out of whack, or it starts doing stuff that we never anticipated would happen, we're surprised. So in fact, if there's a misalignment between your cloud and your business operating model, your operating model for your organization, I should say, that is where a lot of the failures, gaps, overlaps, deficiencies, higher expenses, and so on come from. It's because we simply didn't anticipate how the cloud would change the way in which our operating model worked. But because so many organizations are separated out of the concept of their organization's operating model and their so-called cloud operating model, they're unable to join those, they're unable to link them. So that's where a large source of that, I wouldn't call it failure, but I would say the inability to meet expectations comes from. It's because we didn't do this modeling properly. And very often we didn't do this modeling properly because we viewed the cloud as a technical decision. Whereas in actual fact, the thing that we were automating was a business activity. And when the business activity started performing differently because it was enabled by a cloud component, there's a disconnect because the technical people don't pick that up. The business people don't understand why it happened, and we don't know how to resolve it. So that's key number 4. In the book, there is a way of actually, there's a suggested technique of which can help you to do that mapping. It's called the Cloud Value Co-Creation Map. And it's a fairly complex diagram, but I just want to point out one of the most important components of it is this little flower that sits in the middle of this concept. The flower is about, cloud service provision and consumption. That's what the flower is. So in other words, you want this flower to look beautiful, you want it to work well, you want it to support your business, you really want it to be a thing of beauty. But the petals of the flower are really important. They are 5 high-level strategic focus areas. Now, not every organization will have the same ones. So, one organization may think consumer experience is the most important thing for them. Another one will say, yes, that's important, but really what's most important for this application is the reliability, resiliency, and continuity. All we're doing is storing archival records. Consumer experience is not important here. What is important is the stability and the reliability of this. And so depending on what it is you're doing, these petals will take on greater or reduced importance. I'm going to take one. Let's just say and typically, by the way, most organizations have all of these, but in different parts. So one part of the organization favors one piece or 2 pieces together. Another part will favor another 2 or 3 together. But let's just take, by way of example, we'll take one of those, which is operational excellence. And what we show in the book is, because it's an ITIL book, we restrict the conversation to ITIL, but it can be applied across multiple. But here we have some ITIL practices, and we show exactly in each of these, if operational excellence is your goal, then you'll need problem management. And this is what the consumer needs to do. And this is what the supplier needs to do. It's broken out. Same for incidents, same for change, same, whatever practice you want to put in there. This is a helpful way of helping to map pieces of your operating model and your practices and your value streams to the way in which you're going to use cloud. And this is included in the actual book. Now, key 5. Where we've got, how long have we got left, Jeff? Is it 10 minutes, or did you create this thing for like 4 hours?
I scheduled it for 1.5 hours, but I know sometimes people have to drop at the top of the hour.
So let me cover these last few. There, we've covered the most important aspects, but this one is really important. It's about understanding how you're going to use the cloud. And Richard Lecoq came up with this great thing. It was the two spectrums of how cloud is used and managed. So one is how do you use cloud? Either you're going to use it in a very standardized way. So anything I do today, like storage, I'm just going to move it, lift and shift into the cloud. Right? I may have to manage it differently and use it differently, but it's standardized, it's commodity. On the other hand, you have a product group who's saying, you know, we actually want to build a new product and it's going to be cloud-based. That's never been done before. Right? So we're going to have highly emergent, highly innovative use of the cloud. Again, please note, the cloud itself, highly commoditized. The way it is being used, very emergent, very innovative. Then the second spectrum is, how are you going to manage the cloud? Again, you'll have some organizations that want to be very centralized. It all has to go through the IT department. Others are going to say, IT department is not going to tell me what to do. I get to define what I'm going to do with the cloud and how I manage it. Right? And so the really fun thing is that in every organization, you have multiple points on the spectrum. So one group will want a standardized way, one group will want more emergent, one group will want centralized, one group will want decentralized. So what we did is we just took those and put it into a standard. You know, this is what consultants do. They take any kind of spectrum, turn one on the edge, and suddenly you've got a magic quadrant. There you go. But the really cool thing about this is it gives us 4 kinds of use cases and management cases for the cloud. One, what are you trying to do with the cloud? I want to use standard components for existing solutions. It's a like-for-like replacement. I don't want to change much. I understand certain things in the organization will change, but I'm not going to be very innovative with the things I'm doing with cloud. Whereas 4 is, we're going to just let this thing loose. Product teams can take it on and they can experiment and explore, and it can be wonderful. Right? And you've got these other 2 somewhere in between. It's really important not that you fit into one of these 4 categories, but that you know where in these kind of grids your primary use case for cloud will be for each solution that you move into the cloud, understanding that each one may be different. And a lot of organizations don't do that. They just think, well, moving to the cloud is moving to the cloud. No, it really isn't. It's hugely complex. Key 6, understand the risks and manage those risks. Now, I'm not going to go into these in detail because that will take too long. But when you move to the cloud, as I've implied, you are introducing risk. There's the risk of doing something new, of doing something different, of doing something with people whose skills have not been tested, or with people who are still learning those skills. So how do you do that? Right? And so it's really important as you move into the cloud that you take a look at each one of these areas and you analyze the risk for each of those for the cloud solutions. And before you move to the cloud, you have to find a strategy on how you're going to deal with each one. Key 7 is know who you're working with. And this was one of the biggest complaints that we had from consumers is Amazon doesn't want to do what we tell them to do. From Amazon saying, consumers saying, expecting us to do stuff that we just simply don't do. Right? So you have this huge disconnect. Really important to understand that the cloud service provider is, you have categories, and you have the hyperscale guys. These are the people who provide thousands of services to millions of users around the world, and all the services are the same. That's Amazon, Azure, Google, and so on. For the most part, of course, there are exceptions. For example, the Google AI labs, for example, which are highly specialized and experimental, and so on. But for the most part, highly commoditized. But they don't get involved with your organization to find out your specific requirements. You need to work with somebody else to do that. And that could be a consulting and advisory firm. It could be a broker. It could be solution developers. It's really important that you know who you're working with. Are you working with one of the cloud service providers, or are you working with one of their partners? And how far does that partner's expertise go? Again, this was one of the major trip-up points for organizations. Key 8, and this is the last one, and just as important as all the others, which is define your responsibilities clearly. And I cannot stress this enough, that the disconnect that happens between organizations who think that they're getting something from a cloud service provider when they're not. it's really important to take a look at what each service provider has and what they call their shared responsibility model. Every service provider has one, every cloud service provider. It's usually pretty take it or leave it. We do this, you do that. No negotiation. We're not going to take responsibility for something. However, there are a couple of areas, and one of the most important areas where there is some negotiation needed is the area of service management. How far does incident management go? Do you get involved in problem management? Probably not, because you're reporting incidents, not problems. They're your problems, but they're the cloud service provider incident. How do you map that? Change management. Do you get advanced notification? How far in advance? Do you get a say in what gets changed? Chances are, if you have a small cloud service provider, maybe software as a service, but if you're dealing with a huge cloud service provider, you probably won't get much of a say. And what's just another point on that, on this slide here, is what Forrester called the uneven handshake. And the way we saw this playing out is consumer organization, when they move to the cloud, recognizes that that cloud solution is very strategic to them, because it's going to enable them to go to the next level of whatever they're trying to achieve. But the problem is the cloud service provider does not view them, the consumer, as strategic. They view consumers as a group as strategic, but they don't view individuals. So it's very unlikely, if you are a 1,000-person company and you are using AWS or Azure services or Google services for that matter, it's very unlikely that you're going to get an AWS salesperson sitting on your advisory board. It's take it or leave it. And it's very important to understand that. It's very important to understand it's a very uneven handshake. I can probably best describe it in terms of restaurants. If you're used to kind of ordering your food the way you like it, you're probably going to pay $25 to $35 a plate for it. And you're going to get exactly what you need, cooked in exactly the way you want. But, if you want to commoditize that, say, well, all I ever need is a hamburger and fries. And I'm going to go to McDonald's to get it because they make a hamburger and fries and it's commoditized and it's good at 2 o'clock in the morning. Do not expect them to customize your order. They're not going to add in artichoke dip. They're not going to do your burger medium rare, right? It's not going to happen. The same way, as when you're approaching cloud services, you're dealing with highly commoditized services. You're not going to be able to configure those, You're not going to get the cloud service provider to tailor them to infinite detail. The only time that happens is in a private cloud, which is when you are the only customer for that service from that cloud service provider. And there are very, very few of those. Most of the cloud services, which are highly commoditized, you may configure them, and in software as a service, you can certainly change, you can code certain additions and so on. But when you do that, you immediately run the risk of everything being invalidated on the next upgrade. So, very, very important to understand the nature of the service that you're procuring and the responsibilities involved in managing it and using it. So what makes the cloud work? I think the first thing is, before you even start to try to understand the cloud, know your organization. Know what its purpose is, understand its culture, understand how it works, understand how the cloud is likely to change the way it works, understand its operating model, understand its value streams. If you don't know those things, you've got to find them out before you move to the cloud. And if you've already moved to the cloud and you're feeling pain, this is where you need to start looking for the solution. Don't go knocking on the cloud service provider door and telling them they suck, because they don't really care. No, of course they care, but they're not, they're not going to tailor their service because you couldn't get it to work. More important, figure out why it's not working. It's probably going to be something that you weren't expecting on your side. Understand what the cloud is, understand what it is not. In other words, highly commoditized, standardized service. And that's what you're getting. Know when to use the cloud and when not to use the cloud. I would say there's two major use cases for cloud. One is to do something more cheaply and more quickly than you can do it in-house. So you can do it in-house, but really it's costing you a lot, and it's much easier and much cheaper to get it from the cloud service provider. The second use case is because you want to do something new, and the quickest way to introduce it to your organization is to get it from somebody who's already doing it well, i.e. in the cloud. Those are the two major use cases. Yes, there are some pieces in between, but you really don't want to be moving things into the cloud that you don't understand or that you cannot already manage. It's the age-old story of outsourcing. If you can't manage it in-house, you sure as heck will not be able to manage it in an outsourced environment. Very similar situation with the cloud. Understand how the cloud will change behavior and culture and adapt your organization. The next one is good governance. Don't assume the cloud takes care of stuff. You have to figure out how decisions are made, how compliance is achieved, how to manage risk, how to secure assets. Those are things that you need to be doing as a consumer. And then finally, invest in cloud expertise, even though it is pretty rare. It's not rare. It's just that there is higher demand for those resources than supply. But that's changing. So I would say you should sponsor people to go through those cloud architecture and cloud technologist courses that are offered very cost effectively through the service providers. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. My contact details are there, but we'll stick around and talk and have some questions and discussion, whatever you have time for.
You bet. Thank you very much, David. That was a fantastic presentation. I know I have a couple of questions, and I suspect some more of the audience will as well. Real quickly, I'm going to share my screen back to my presentation, just very quickly go over a couple of announcements, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So I always like to put up the upcoming training opportunities available through ITSM Academy's public classes. You see those listed here. Give everyone a chance to read through those. I'm currently slated to teach a couple of those, and I have a nice discount code here at the bottom as well. So if you're interested in learning more about those, please feel free to contact me. And I'm excited to be a part of teaching those classes that are coming up for a couple of those, the Drive Stakeholder Value, as well as Digital and IT Strategy in June.
So does Donna have a code as well, Jeff? Is that
her code's probably way better than mine, actually. You'd be friends with Donna, right?
Yeah, pay 30% more for the course. Yeah.
There you go.
Right, Donna.
All right. Real quick, our next meeting, we have another very special guest presenter, Rayanne Bruno, coming next month to give her presentation entitled The Third Door, which I'm very excited about. I love the idea of having a third door, a third alternative that we're not typically thinking about as far as our usual either or choices. And I'm excited to see her make it back into our group to present next Tuesday, April 26th. Excited about that. Previous recordings, including this one, will be posted out on my YouTube channel. I have that linked on our Meetup space as well as in LinkedIn. A couple of other things to continue to take advantage of. We have the Treasure Valley Agile Community Monthly Meetups. I've got the link to those. Our Project Management Institute Western Idaho chapter monthly meetings, their events page. And then I'm not sure what's going to happen with Keep the Learning On with Roy and Greg. I go back and review some of their old recordings as I have time, and there's a lot of great learning and information. So go back and at least check those out on their blog and YouTube channel as well, and to learn some more from some of our thought leaders that are out there. So again, please encourage, I encourage all of you to please continue to stay connected with the group on our Meetup and LinkedIn, and encourage others to continue to come to these meetings if you like what you're seeing and want to continue to just spread the word and grow the group as we're able to. So if there's any other comments, questions, or feedback for me as far as facilitating the meeting and what you'd like to see, please let me know. We have speakers lined up with Rayanne next month, and then Radkinson's going to be speaking in June. I'm looking for a May speaker, so if anyone knows anyone that would like to present in May, and especially if at a practitioner level anyone would like to present, have that opening in May as of right now. So with that, I will go ahead and stop my share, and we'll open it up to some more Q&A for David. Does anybody have any questions or any comments that they'd like to make?
Right now, I just have a.
Go ahead. I was going to say I'll let other people go because I have a list. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I'll just give a comment that I really enjoyed the presentation. I particularly enjoyed the differentiation on what's being commoditized, that the cloud is commoditized, but what you're doing on it might not be, and all of that. That was an interesting distinction to hear made. I guess, I mean, if I had to ask a question, since I'm a consumer, I'm not in IT, I'm the subject of IT. I do data science on the cloud, and now I'm in a group that isn't as advanced in terms of what they're using on the cloud. They're mostly still on-prem, and they're asking me to lead into what kind of cloud should they bring in. And I guess I'll just ask, do you have any thoughts on that, or how what you just presented relates to specifically internal consumption of the cloud rather than any new products for outside?
I have a couple because I've dealt with some similar situations before on research science. A bunch of researchers doing medical research, and their experience on using the cloud was actually pretty negative. They moved to the cloud, and suddenly their costs spiraled to 3 times what they were, in spite of the fact that the per gigabyte cost had reduced by 80%. And I was asked why that was happening. And the simple answer was data governance. And it was because in the past, the assumption by the scientists was that IT takes care of managing data. So they will make sure that it's on the correct type of storage with the correct type of recall. So for example, some data needed to be on, pretty much close to real-time retrieval. Other data was archival. And IT kind of figured that out and, stored it in the right place. Well, when it went to the cloud, data scientists, or not the data scientists, the researchers thought, this is cool. I can get all of my data and I can get it in real time and it's cheaper. Well, it was duplicated. Archive data was stored in real time. There was no archive. Everything was backed up, and it was backed up more than once. And suddenly, just all costs went out of the window. And the downside of this was that the costs were still being billed through IT. They were not being billed directly to the scientists. So there was no way in which those scientists could correlate their behavior with the data to the cost of the data. In their mind, they were just, you IT guys suck. We thought you sucked before, but you really suck now, right? It had nothing to do with IT. It was all about data governance. And I think, the response was, let's take a look at data governance. And that was the most important thing. The actual cloud solution that they used was good. It was just they were using a very highly priced component of the cloud instead of varying the types of storage they were using suitable for the types of data they were storing. So, I would say you've got to start with the owners of the data and the people who are using the data and consuming the data. And, those kind of decisions need to be made before you move into the cloud. And the trade-offs between the different types of cost and platform that are being used have to be made before, because there is no such thing as just simple storage. It's different types of storage for different types of data for different kinds of use. And that has to be clearly defined before you move to the cloud. In most cases, it's not in-house because we've bought all of the equipment we needed. It's in the data center anyway. Our job is to make sure that we use it in the best possible way. So we tend to, We tend to make use of spare capacity when we can. We tend to make creative use of capacity when we run out of capacity. In the cloud, you can't do that. It's pay as you go. You use it, you pay for it, done. And by the way, there's no refund. You used it, so you paid for it, done. There's no, that's it. There's no, oh, well, we tried it on this, so we'll move it rather to that, which is cheaper, and then we can get a refund. No, you used it on that, and it was that expensive, and that's what you pay. Learned your lesson? Okay, good. Now you can move it across to the other one. So, you know, better we make those kind of discoveries before. Now, I will say, to be fair, every cloud service provider will work with you to do a detailed proof of concept. So you can actually model those costs. It's not a case of trial by error. You can actually go in and say, well, here's the kind of data we have. Here's how we consume it. Here's how we need to store this kind of data, that kind of data, etc. And they'll put a proof of concept together for you, which will enable you to model the cost behavior. And then, of course, the second thing is make sure that the costs are communicated effectively before you move to the cloud and then after you move to the cloud, so that the users of those services understand very clearly what the cost implications are of using different kinds of service in the cloud. Sorry, not a very detailed answer, but I hope that kind of provided some pointer.
I appreciate it, David. Thank you.
All right, great question.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments from the group?
So,
I was going to say, go ahead.
go ahead, Michael. No, go.
Okay.
You go.
All right. I was going to say it's like if you're looking to automate, I was an infrastructure before I went into management, and if you're looking to automate something, you need to have the process laid out, right? Because automation just allows you, if you're doing something bad, just allows you to do something bad really fast. Your comment to Brian's question seems like, you know, you really need to check out the cloud and have your everything laid out and understand the costs and the governance and all of your requirements prior to just moving into the cloud and just doing it. I was curious if you have experience with, like, there's companies that are like Amazon has data science services. They have data lakes and things like that.
Right.
And then you have companies like Snowflake who are doing data, but they're not doing the infrastructure. They're just doing. Do you find it's more advantageous? Is one better than the other? Is there more expertise in one? Have you had better luck, or have you had it in your experience?
Everyone is different, and it all depends which component of your operating model you're using that cloud service to support. So you're looking for more ready-made data that already exists in a third party, or are you looking to store data that is unique to you and that only you want to be able to use in your own dedicated kind of environment? You know, that those are different. Now, again, you raise a really interesting point, because before Snowflake came along, it was those kind of services, they were there, but they weren't really readily available and high profile. Now suddenly something comes along that says, hey, could we use this? And it not only, so I want to be clear, when we say we take a piece of the operating model and we move it into the cloud, we're not only automating our existing use case. What we're also doing is exploring new use cases. We're also saying, well, if we use Snowflake data in this way, in this kind of business process, does that represent a new business opportunity, a new operating model, a new way of doing business? So you have both. And so you have, on the one hand, I want it to be to conform as closely as possible to the way my business works today. To the other hand is, I want to use this new services to do things we've never done before. And the two use cases are very, very different. And you know, one is you're trying to constrain the use so that you're sticking to your current operating model. The other one is you're trying to transform your organization to a new operating model. And those are very, very different. So, you know, that's just something to bear in mind. But your point about automation is a really important one as well. You know, the cloud offers and is beginning to offer layers of automation that were not possible before. And so we classified in bits. We said, you know, there's simple automation, There's serial automation, there's complex automation, and then we created another one which we called intelligent automation, which is you're able to assess the context in which you're automating and make a decision based on how you're going to respond to that context. And the cloud actually contains a lot of resources to enable you to automate intelligently. So the algorithms that exist in the cloud, the labs that exist within the cloud. Now again, I have to say a lot of those are commoditized. They've come out of the industry and they've been commoditized. Doesn't mean they're not new to us. They may be brand new to us. And so, yeah, you know, the cloud can certainly challenge us to think of new ways of automating things as well. It's very exciting. So, sorry, I kind of went off tangent on your question. Did I answer what
That's
you
totally
originally
fine.
asked?
Yeah. No, you're fine. Yeah, I was just asking in general. I didn't have any specific needs. So, but thank you for that answer. And it's,
Sure.
I think it's just interesting. It's fascinating. Your speech and everything today, your presentation was great. So it's fun just listening, right? A lot of stuff that I hadn't even thought about. So, you know, especially in the context, I'm always thinking about from a tactical operational standpoint. When I think of cloud, I'm like, oh, IaaS, and we're going to build through web server up there and stuff. Yes, very interesting points today. So yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, as you progress along this, and any of you in your organizations, if you ever feel the need to call me in to press a point home for you, please feel free to do that. It doesn't cost you anything. I will happily run this presentation or a similar version to it for you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, Donna, give you a chance to ask some questions.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. One of them has to do, like, I feel like you've sort of answered this, but I kind of want to hear what you have to say about this. So this whole idea of expectations not being met, where did those expectations come from, right? So they apparently set some really high expectations. Were they setting their expectations based on what the highest performing organizations were doing using their digital operating models? Like, does operating model come back into this conversation here?
No.
And in reality, they were working with a traditional operating model, and so they couldn't get there. Like, where did the expectations come from?
They come from a range of different sources. Some of it comes from marketing material. Some of it comes from the price lists of the service catalogs. Some of it comes from, as you say, looking at leading organizations and what they've been able to achieve. But the interesting thing about that last one is that what other organizations have been able to achieve is often not reproducible because the culture doesn't exist.
Right.
And that's often overlooked. I remember when, and it has nothing to do with the cloud, it has to do with clouds. Remember when United tried to compete with Southwest and they created TED?
I remember TED, yeah.
Yeah, I remember TED, and it didn't last very long. What they were trying to do is they were trying to go head to head with the low-cost airlines, and specifically, they looked at Southwest and they said, we're going to emulate that. They couldn't because the culture didn't support it. It was strongly union-led. It was management has the final say, whereas Southwest is very much a flat level organization and so on. So, you know, very often the expectations are created by looking elsewhere, but not taking all factors into account. But yeah, they came from a range of places. I couldn't say there was one more than the other. I would say, though, the theoretical pricing models and use cases offered by the early cloud service providers very often created this impression that you could achieve this very easily. And I think now people are beginning to realize that it is achievable, but it's not that easy.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Will we ever learn that there is no such thing as a silver bullet? Not sure about that. But we just did a presentation on Deming, and Deming, you know, one of his core principles was, you know, think about the long term, and we still continue to want the silver bullet. Yeah. So my other question, David, is, and quite honestly, we're a little bit on the fence in terms of whether to bring this course into our portfolio. And part of why I came here is because I wanted to hear you talk about this. And your tie into digital and IT strategy, first of all, right, shifts my brain cells, because you know I'm such a huge advocate of digital and IT strategy. I love the book, I love the course. But who do you see, how do you see the book being received? Who do you see as the target audience for this course? Because there's kind of two perspectives here, right? There's the organizations that are just getting started and you hope that we can help them prevent these mistakes. And you made a comment along the way, you said the organizations that are in pain, right? So maybe now we can give them some knowledge to help them understand why they're in pain and how to work their way out of it. But what's your thought on that?
So first off, it's not a mandatory course. So you're not going to get people coming through this who need the certification so that they can get their ITIL master or whatever it is they're aiming towards. So count that out of your audience. These are people who have a genuine requirement to learn about how to manage cloud services. At the same time, there is an understanding, as there always is within IT, that as long as you have the right technical architects in your organization, you don't have to worry about this level of management. So is this going to be the bestseller that everyone is hoping it will be? I'm not sure. Does it have a lot of value? I think it has a huge amount of value. And here's the value that I have heard. Every single time we have presented either a presentation like this or a course, somebody on the call has said, I wish I'd known this 6 months ago. And that keeps coming back to me. Is like, we want to prevent people from having to say that. Of course, this is compounded by the fact that the book is not available at the moment because of the changeover between Axelos and PeopleCert. They haven't selected the publisher, so you cannot actually buy this book except the PDF version. So it's a little bit tricky right now. So they haven't been pushing it very hard. I would say this is not for the cloud architect, although I would love to see cloud architects at least come through an overview of this. But it is for the leader who is considering using cloud services or who is using cloud services and experiencing pain with them. And that could be a business leader, not necessarily an IT leader, because, you know, especially on the SaaS side, you know, these are not IT people buying these services. These are business people. They're marketing, sales, etc. So,
right.
Yeah. But just before I go back to Michael, this one thing I would say is you cannot have a digital strategy without the cloud. It's impossible. So.
Well, that was my first thought when I saw the title of this webinar, and it was well titled in that respect, because it was like, my first thought was, is this really an if conversation or more of a when conversation, right? Because
it is
you can't,
very much so.
I think you just can't, right? Any organization that's out there today saying, well, we don't need cloud is on their way to obsolete.
Yeah, but
you know,
I think the perception amongst a lot of people is, well, we've already started. We're quite a way along our journey. So why would we need a course that tells us how to do it? But actually they do. We're not that far along in our journey.
So I have a question for you, David. In your experience, do you see, kind of to Donna's point about companies in pain, right? Do you see more companies in pain that are like, you know, Blue Cross traditional, been around since like I don't know, whenever, years, you know, almost 100 years or something. And so we're struggling, right? Like we're successful in some aspects and not in others because we have this traditional, we have a culture, we have a mindset of how we want to use it versus like a startup where you without a credit card, and it's like you and 3 developers and you're going to get started and you're born in the cloud effectively. Do you see more or less pain with the traditional companies, or do you still see struggles with new companies that are just because they still have to figure it out, right? If they have no prior experience.
The struggles are different. But I certainly see the kind of struggles we've been talking about today, primarily with the people who have a traditional view of managing technology. And Blue Cross Blue Shield is an interesting case, not that I want to talk out of school, but Blue Cross Blue Shield in general across many states has faced this significant competitive challenge from people selling and marketing healthcare services to individuals using cloud-based apps and allowing them to compare. And suddenly your annual cycle of, onboarding and offboarding and so on and changing is no longer as powerful as it was. You cannot lock people in as much anymore because of this cloud technology. So in certain states, and I don't know if this is true of you, but in certain states, Blue Cross Blue Shield and others are having to keep their legacy systems as they have been, but introduce these very innovative product teams that are cloud-based. And there is a dichotomy between those two organizations, which is kind of humorous in a way, because if you've been around long enough, what you will know is that all of the hubris that's involved in these product teams that are kind of attracting all the revenue and money and investment and so on are going to end up in the back office in 5 years' time anyway, because they're going to become legacy. So I think very important for companies like that is to understand the progression from cutting edge competitive advantage to back office legacy, and how we identify where in the portfolio cycle these services are, and how we use cloud effectively to make those legacy services more efficient, still accessible, but at the same time free up investment for some of those competitive advantage ones. That's the strategic side of it. But yeah, I think Blue Cross Blue Shield has a unique use case for this. Any health insurance company has a unique use case for this. But I think the biggest pain is associated with people who are struggling to make the transformation. It's not about the cloud technology, it's about the struggle to make the transformation. I forget the author's name, one of the Procter & Gamble people who has authored a book on digital transformation estimates that over 70% of Fortune 500s will not exist within 5 years' time. Simply because they're not able to make that change, and they will lose their competitive advantage for a number of reasons, not only because they failed to make the digital change, but because they're not gearing their products towards emerging consumer groups and so on and so forth. There's a whole other set of theories going on about that, but the cloud is kind of where you feel the pain, because that's where those changes in behavior and usage and management are having to be made.
I think that behavior word is such a big part of this conversation.
Very much.
Yeah.
It's so underestimated.
I took a few notes as you were presenting, David, and you just said one of the magic words for me, which is portfolio, right? I'd love to have a deeper discussion with you on portfolio implications and how you layer that over this whole presentation. Oh, Brian, see you after Brad. Yep, bye. So that's one piece. And then the other thing, I know that there's a lot of strong linkage, and Donna was rightly pointing this out with digital IT strategy, but I also see a lot of linkage with this class in some of the things from DPI. I see governance. I see organizational change management all over the place with this presentation.
Absolutely.
I see the need to measure. So what's our current state baseline so that we can actually show the value if we're going to make these strategic decisions to move from A to B, and be able to actually quantify the benefits of doing that. So I think it would be really an interesting follow-up conversation to have at some point to kind of take a look at maybe some of those additional pieces. Your presentation, by the way, David, was fantastic, and I learned a lot. I think it would be great to even round out some of those other pieces with this even more. And then to Donna's point, I think then you can even add even more context to what you do, not just to market the class and to try and get more people interested in it, but to add more value to the outcome of having people be a part of it too.
Right.
Yeah, although I think it's fair to say that the people who have that interest in that well-rounded and very thorough view of strategy, cloud, direction, are in a minority. I think most people are still struggling with, well, how do I get XLAs on my help desk, right? Which
yeah, there's truth to that too.
Those people are not going to be engaged in these discussions.
Yeah, and Michael, I saw you have to run. Thanks for being here. That was actually my second question, David, which on your last slide, right? You're saying all the things that you need to kind of have as prerequisites with your operating model and understanding your value streams. Yeah. So many organizations aren't there. They're moving to the cloud anyway. So it feels like there's a need to kind of figure out what's that balancing point between level of
Well,
required maturity, or can
you
you
know,
learn as you
yeah.
go to try and build some of those things in parallel was going to be my question.
Then it becomes trial and error. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it becomes trial and error, and it can be a very expensive exercise. It could even cost the survival of the company. It's not scare tactics. It's just you're trying something new. You're trying something different. There's a high degree of risk involved. And going at it with your eyes closed is always risky. So, my battery is showing that it's going to fail any minute. So
we
if I
are
get
at
cut off, it's not
time.
because I want to be.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate everybody being here. But you came in late. Hope I'm pronouncing your name correct. Did you have anything, question or comment that you wanted to add if you're still out there? Okay. I'm speaking, it's on mute. All right. Well, I want to say again, very big personal thank you, David, for being here and for presenting to the group. I'm excited to share this recording for some of my contacts that weren't able to be here and attend in person today. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you again for being here and appreciate everyone's attendance. And we'll look forward to what I think will be a great presentation from Rayanne next month.